IVM.
Hello and welcome to episode 1 of Getting Meta, my new podcast. Thank you so much for joining in. Whether you heard my voice on Simplified or The Origin of Things before, or if you're listening to me for the first time. If you want a little more context about the show and what it's all about, do go back and listen to episode 0 of this show, which is really the season 1 prologue. In short, this is a podcast where I, Deepak, or Chuck as the world calls me, speak to some very smart people to sort of like unravel their habits, thought processes, tools, and mental models, which can then be applied by anyone to any field. The show focuses less on their achievements and more on them as a person and their way of thinking. Hence, I get meta with them. Each episode aims to inspire, entertain, and leave you with questions to ask yourself, frameworks to apply, and of course, a lot of great content to check out. Now, coming to this episode, and I couldn't have thought of a better guest to start getting meta with. If you listen to podcasts in India, it's very unlikely that you haven't heard of Amit Varma. His show, The Seen and the Unseen, is one of the most popular ones in the country, despite having episode lengths that frequently top 3 hours. His research, the free-flowing nature of his show, and just the sheer quality of guests in the conversation make it a must-listen for anyone interested in Indian life, public policy, culture, economics, and many other subjects, away from the noise and blood pressure-inducing pace of traditional TV news and debate. Before becoming a podcasting icon, Amit ran one of India's most popular blogs, India Uncut, and has also written for several publications such as The Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, Observer, Times of India, Bloomberg Quint, Cricket Next, and he was also managing editor of Cricinfo for a few years. He relaunched the online magazine Pragati in 2017 as a chief editor. He was a winner of the Bastiat Prize for 2 years, the first person to do so. And the prize, of course, is named after the French economist from whose paper he took the title of his podcast, The Seen and the Unseen. In 2009, Business Week named him as one of the 50 most powerful people in India. Apart from that impressive resume, though, Amit is also one of the best read and smartest people I know. But the reason I wanted to speak with him is because I always thought Amit is an example of what's possible with just sheer doggedness, conviction, and a willingness to experiment. And these are themes that will shine through in the conversation you're about to hear. There are many valuable lessons here for creators and even, potential content creators. There are many nuggets, references, loads of practical advice. And also, you must know that when I started recording the show with Amit in December 2020, I didn't have a name for the show yet. And we gave ourselves a challenge that we would find a name for the show through the course of our conversation. And that's really how Getting Meta got the name that it did. And you will hear those bits as well towards the end of the episode. And with that out of the way, enjoy this conversation with the one and only Amit Varma. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's my pleasure for inviting me on your wonderful show, though we have to take it on faith that it's wonderful because it is beginning with me. So let's it's in our hands.
Yeah. I was desperately searching for some interesting way to start this conversation, which wasn't getting into the questions by themselves. And I was just, stalking your Twitter bio, using all sorts of tools to find what your early tweets were and photos. And then it turns out that a gem of a memory presented itself. Because do you remember what happened on this day 5 years back, Amit?
What happened on this day 5 years back? Are you kidding me? We're recording this on Christmas 2020. So you mean Christmas 1995? I have no memory of what
5 years back. 5 years back, Amit.
Oh, sorry, Christmas 2015. See, this is what...
On Christmas 2015, one of our very close friends got a Christmas hamper.
Ah, yes, I remember. This is, in fact, this is a massively historical moment. Yeah, this is the Narendra Shenoy selfie stick, NSSS.
That's right. And for those of you who don't know, Naren is a very good friend of mine. Naren and I started a podcast called Simplified together, from which I have taken a voluntary retirement for now, but is still going very strong. Or we hadn't met before, too many times before then. And the joke over there was our good friend Naren, a industrialist Don of Bombay. he had got this Christmas hamper with all sorts of assorted things, if I remember, which had wine, which had chocolate, and a selfie stick for some reason. Yes, that was the flavor of the season back then, and then that was christened the NSSS, the Narendra Shenoy selfie stick. And I'd like to think the Narendra Shenoy selfie stick had some role to play in your subsequent creative endeavors, Amit.
It absolutely did because, like one, I think we took a picture with it. It's a historic moment, so we have to find that picture. Do you have that picture?
I do have that picture actually. I'll need to dig it out, but I do have it somewhere, and
Someday,
will be linked
we
in
will.
the notes.
We will link the pic. You will link the picture in the show notes. It's your show.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, this is a fabulous story, and it's like how serendipity makes things happen. That a short while later, and we had actually, by the way, met once before that. I think in Infinity Mall, where you were walking around with Ananda Ramachandran, Big Fat Phoenix,
Right.
and I was with whoever, and he introduced us, and yeah. So I remember you from there. And at the time, when you came to Naren's house 5 years ago, you came there to record an episode of Simplified with him.
That's right.
And a few weeks later, or sometime later, you put up a Facebook post saying, "Hey, we have joined IVM Networks, and Simplified will now be produced by IVM." At which point, I think you had put a photograph, and I made some joke about the Narendra Shenoy selfie stick. So the NSSS. Now, and of course, I congratulated you. And at that point, Amit Doshi of IVM jumped in and said, "Mr. Varma, I have asked you before to do a podcast. You have said no. Would you like to revisit it?" And I said, "Okay." And one thing led to another. So in a sense, it all started with you.
It all started with that selfie stick, and it's kind of nice. It's kind of poignant that I found this fact out 10 minutes ago, desperately searching for some early embarrassing tweet of yours or something that I could pull out. But no, this turned out to be it, and I'm glad. I think this is quite poetic. As of the time of recording, this show is still unnamed. The idea for this show, I've had it for a long time, and it's always had some shape or form in my head. But one thing was very clear, that among the first three guests will be you. And the idea for this, actually, a year back, I was writing one of those year-end pieces for one of the publications that I write for. And the idea over there was, can we figure out, and there is a magazine on design and branding that I wrote for, still write for, in fact, the hard copy. And one of the things that we wanted to do was, all right, let's just find 10 people in the space of design and who do something creative, and ask them one small tweak that they've made to their lives in the last 1 year, which has affected them in some way. Not something grand, no, thought leadership piece, one small thing. And I immediately pinged Rohan Joshi, Mojo Rojo, on Instagram and Twitter, one of India's top comedians and one of the co-founders of the collective AIB, another person who I have immense respect for, not just as a creator, but also as a person. And he said something that was very nice. He said, I just changed my morning ringtone from something startling to something soothing. And it's just nice to wake up to something, not jolting out of bed. It sets the tone for the day. And he says it's a small thing, but it's just changed my life or at least, it just changed a small bit in 29. And since then, I've been toying with this idea of, all right, I've been a big fan of the Tim Ferriss show for a long time. I really love how he interviews people, not just, digging out the history and stuff like that, but also, how he digs out mannerisms, habits, mental models, and things like that. And I always wanted to do that over here in India because I think the cultural context is very different over here, which is why I think it makes sense to have something. And that's really why I have gone ahead and decided to do this foolhardy little venture. But foolhardy little ventures have a way of sticking around if there is enough doggedness behind them.
I think all great ventures start as foolhardy ventures because otherwise they would not be great. Because to be great, you have to do something that's not been done before and do something new. So yeah, despite my atheism, I have nothing to say to you but Godspeed.
Thank you so much, or whatever power you believe in speed. So Amit, I have, what we are generally going to be talking about. I really just want to get behind not the public policy intellectual, but really the person behind that, how the person who makes all of the public facing stuff that we see tick. So I have a lot of questions around productivity and your reading and stuff like that, but I'd like to start with something a little left of center, which is what would be, I know you've been talking a lot recently about the book that you want to write now, and we all cheer this on very much. What do you think the last book that you ever write would be like? What do you think the topic would be? What is it like? Okay, this is my final flourish. This is the last words that I want to put on paper to the world.
That's a good question because there's a friend of mine who shall go unnamed and who's a journalist, and he has ideas for a bunch of books that he wants to do and all of those. One of which he's writing. And at one point we were chatting about it, and I was like, "Why are you procrastinating so much? Why don't you get down to it?" And he said, "Let me share my ideas with you." And he shared a bunch of ideas, and and at the end of it, I asked him that, "Tell me something. If you had a year to live and one book to write, what would you write?" And it was none of his ideas, and what came to his mind was something deeply personal and had nothing to do with any of those ideas. And I don't want to say what it was because it's kind of sad and tragic in a sense, the idea that he picked. And I told him, then that's what you should write. And as it happens, he didn't. He's doing something else entirely right now. So in my case, I realized at the time of asking him this that it's a good metric to figure out what I want to write. In fact, for anybody, it is a good metric to think about that, if I had a year to live, what would I do now? Or, if you're working on a book, if this was the last book I did, or, and I think that can help focus the mind in terms of what is important to you. And so I don't really have an answer because, I mean, I have a half written novel which I want to finish, which is probably that book. I mean, at the time I started this is a logic I used that if I had to write one book, it would probably be this, but I still have to finish that. And before that, there are some non-fiction books I want to do. For example, the one I'm working on as we record this, and it's kind of overdue, is this book called Hacking Cricket, which is about which is not about cricket strategy. It's about how to think about cricket strategy. So getting very meta. Because one of the things I've found that I like doing, and it could be either an idiosyncrasy or a strength or whatever, I don't know, is that whenever I do something, whether it's podcasting or writing or cricket strategy, I kind of try to take a step back and get a little meta about it, and go back to first principles, and I find that clarifies my thinking a lot.
Awesome. I think this segues in nicely too. So let's just take this little step back from the final thing that you're ever going to do, and obviously we can't not talk about the seen and the unseen. Right. So, and I'm sure you thought about this at some point of time, but say 20 years out from here, what becomes of the seen and the unseen? Is it going to remain a podcast? Is it going to evolve to something else? Could it be an institution? Like, where could it possibly go? I'm sure you've given this some thought, as modest as you are.
No, if it exists, it'll exist as a podcast. And also, 20 years, who's seen 20 years? I don't know if I'll be around, and if I'm around, whether I'm still doing this. But it's interesting you should ask that question, because part of my conception for what the seen and the unseen should be, when I started thinking about it seriously, was that if there is a listener who's tuning in from say 30 years later, I want the seen and the unseen to be one of the shows from this time that has value in say 2050. So I want to build this repository of great content and not necessarily something that just speaks to the current time. Like, we often think about our podcast reaching across space. So in that sense, I wanted my podcast to reach across time. And I thought that would free me up to do work that was not necessarily kind of tied to the present moment. Like, one of my friends was starting a podcast, and she asked me for advice, and she was very worried about who's going to listen to episode 1, 2, 3. I said, listen, don't think of the listener at episode 1. Think of the person who discovers your podcast at episode 100. What are they binging on? You want to give them something that is just a delight to binge on, and you want to build that value and that content for them. So, whether or not I am still around or podcasting or whatever 20 years from now, I would hope that in some way, what the show, and this sounds very grandiose and arrogant also, because I mean, even to assume that you've done something that has value for the current time is a bit of an assumption. But yeah, I mean, you got to aim for something, and that seems like a fair thing to aim for.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and wish you all the best for that. Not that you need it now, but I think you're well on your way. I think if there was a time capsule of this time and there was some audio that needed to come from our part of the world, I think I hope that something like this would be part of that digital flash drive that makes that open up in 2050, and then you'll have scientists who are wondering which way to put the USB in the right way. And I think you're well on your way. So let's talk about the seen and the unseen again. I think because I think a lot of what I want to glean out from you obviously comes from there. I think it would be fair to say that the show has evolved a long way. I think people often focus on the length, right? I mean, when you talk about the show, you often say, "Oh, yeah, we started the first episode as 18 minutes or something," and now obviously you have the same disregard for length as Douglas Adams had for deadlines. So the length apart, I think, because I've been a listener from show one. And for me, I guess I haven't felt it because it's gradual, right? The 18 minutes becomes 25 minutes, becomes 45 minutes, etc. But also, because I went back and heard a couple of the old episodes, what was striking to me is that, of course, you've got a lot more comfortable. The format seems a lot tighter. You've got a certain structure in which you ask questions, and I don't just necessarily mean those standard questions that you have at the beginning or at the end, but it just seems like a more cohesive package right now. I must admit that I am one of I am part of the minority camp that still clamors for the dream sequence to be brought back in the beginning. Let me make that extremely clear. But I just want to know, like, how has while we see the output has changed for sure, and we can theorize on that, but I just want to understand from a process point of view what's changed for you from episode one to that mammoth 200th episode that you had done and the one subsequently with Ashok and
Yeah. So, before I talk about the process, I'll actually get a little meta, as you by now know I like to do, and talk about how my thinking about it evolved. And this is actually a good show to do that because I think there is something useful in it for any creator or for anyone who's thinking about content. Now, the thing is, when I came into podcasting, when Amit and May, who was an creative director, May Thomas, whose voice you, by the way, hear in my show's intro, when they sat with me at Fable in Juhu and they said, why don't you do a show? And we chatted about it. I had not heard podcasts until then, right? And of course, we've since parted ways and I produced the show myself, but, IVM played a key part in that early phase. Now, I hadn't heard podcasts then. So my impressions, all of which turned out to be completely false, which is why one should be humble and open to admitting that one is wrong. My impressions was that, look, people have a short attention span and audio is basically like video without the visuals. So it is even more boring. And therefore, I have to hook people in like 10 seconds and I have to finish it in 20 minutes, and that is the optimal episode. And I think I had an early episode which is 9 minutes or 11 minutes or something like that. Now I realized that that was wrong, and there are three reasons it is wrong, which I think came as a revelation to me and came over a period of time, and they have to do with when people listen to podcasts, how people listen to podcasts, why people listen to podcasts. The when, of course, as we know, is your typical use cases are when people are working out, commuting, or doing errands at home, like washing dishes or whatever. And the thing with all of those is that you are a passive audience, but you are a captive audience. You have chosen to be captive. If you're out jogging and you're bored by something, Amit says on his podcast, it's too much of a pain to, stop and dig into your phone and kind of change that. So you've chosen to be a captive audience. And that's important because if you're watching a YouTube video or you're reading a book or whatever, like you can click on a tab and do something else. You can turn your head and talk to someone. You can do alt tab and it's all changed, but you're far less likely to be distracted when you are kind of listening to a podcast. So that is the when. The second part is the how. Now, again, this has something to do with physiology, and believe it or not, the way we are wired, because our natural speed of talking comes to between 150 words a minute to 220 words a minute max, right? And I am kind of middle aged and getting on, so I'm a little slow at 160 words a minute. But the natural speed at which the brain can take in content is between 300 to 500 words a minute, which is why whenever you're talking to someone, it can be hard to keep their attention because they've got spare attentional capacity and they don't need to use all of their brain to listen to what you're saying. Now, what therefore happens is that it's very easy to listen at double speeds. Now, the first time I heard the concept of listening to something at a higher speed, I thought, oh no, it'll be squeaky and blah, blah, blah. But then what happens is you take it to 1.2 that normalizes, 1.5 that normalizes. And now I listen to everything between 2 and 2.5 or even more. In fact, Krish Ashok, who was on my show recently, said that he listens to my show at 3. And he got into the habit because one of his colleagues who is visually impaired would have this software which would read stuff out to him at 6x. And he could figure it out. It wasn't gibberish. His brain could process it, which tells you something about the brain. So this is a how. So the when is when people listen to podcasts, it tells you they're a captive audience, not so likely to be distracted. The how tells you that they're consuming much more content in that time. than you can imagine. So, for example, a 20-minute episode, which I earlier thought was optimal, someone's tying his shoelaces to go out jogging and they're getting ready to go out jogging. And by the time they've tied their shoelaces, the episode is over because it took 10 minutes, right? The third reason is why. Why do people listen to podcasts? And the reason people listen to podcasts is one is, of course, a circumstance. If you're commuting or jogging, it's the other option to music and it's fine. But the key thing I found about people is that bit about the short attention span is rubbish. That, yes, we all have short attention spans. I have a short attention span in certain contexts and situations. But in other contexts and situations, I want to sit down and read a book for a couple of hours, or I want depth. Now, there are two reasons why we don't get depth in our lives. One is that we just don't have time. Many of us, unlike me, have jobs and things to do and all of that. And, it's just too busy. You can't sit for 3 hours every day and read a book. You don't have the time. While with podcasts, it's part of something else you're doing, so it's easier. The second thing is, if what does a mass media give us? The mass media doesn't give us depth. We are not going to get depth on television or almost any other mass media out there because their incentives are different. As I keep saying, that they've paid huge license fees to get whatever. It takes a lot of money to keep them going, so they have to cater to the lowest common denominator. And the result is that they are going broad. They are not going deep. And in this trade-off between breadth and depth also incidentally indicates why podcasting is not just radio on demand. That's another misconception people can have, that podcasting is radio on demand. But the thing is, radio will always go broad. They can't go too deep. Whereas, and again, incentives come in play, especially in India, our FM stations require such huge license fees to get into the business in the first place. You've got all kinds of regulations, so you can't cover politics, you can't do news. So you're again lowest common denominator. And the result is that not only can they not cater to niches, which is obvious, but those niches are never discovered. People within those niches don't know that they are a niche, that they exist, and that has a social consequence. But with podcasting, a podcaster can go as deep as she wants, and she can just make a podcast about anything, which can then reach out. And then a community forms around whatever niche topic it is that would otherwise not have known that it existed, which to me is remarkable. It's almost like a public good. It's a social service. So, as podcasters, Chuck, you and I should be incredibly proud right now. So, over a period of time, I realized that, this is why this medium is so different. And in fact, this is why if it exists 20 years later, it'll only be as a podcast and as nothing else. Because, like I had Nilesh Mishra on my show recently, and he does this show that I really love called The Slow Interview, where he'll take people to his farmhouse in UP and he'll talk to them for 2-3 hours and all of that. But the point is, his max length that he's reached for is maybe 1.5 hours. And he can't really go for more than that because it's YouTube. It's video, it's not podcasting. So people are actively watching it. They can turn away at any point. So he's got to be careful about things like, distractions and all of those other things. But that is not something that a podcaster needs to worry about. So this is my sort of core thinking about, it's a bit of a preamble to your actual question, but I think it's important because this shows how I think about it. And therefore, when I approach my podcast, and again, while researching for what to teach in my podcasting course, I thought fairly deeply about all the other interview shows out there. Russ Roberts, Tyler Cowen, Joe Rogan, all of those guys, trying to figure out what are their styles, what are their imperatives. And it's very interesting. Each of them has a specific identity. There are trade-offs you're making between depth and breadth. There are, a different sort of tonal styles. Like I try to have a conversation and not a Q&A feel. Others will have more of a Q&A feel, and that might work for them. Right. So what I kind of realized is my sweet spot and works for me is, one, go for the conversation. Don't go for a Q&A where you ask a question, the other person answers and stops. You ask another question. That's damn boring, and that's more suited to a half an hour format. But when I can stretch out, I try to have a conversation. It becomes a priority for me, in fact, to get my guests to relax in the beginning, maybe talk about, where they grew up, where they went to school, what that was like, all of that stuff, and kind of work that out. And so that's where all the thought came from. And it's very interesting that, like I started a newsletter, though I haven't really posted there at indiauncut.substack.com, but I wrote a post about how the form that one chooses shapes the content, and that can shape the person. that because I choose this form which allows me to stretch out and go deep and have languid conversations. And again, one aspect of those conversations is that you have to respect the person you're speaking to. So you will never find me interrupting my guest or looking for gotcha moments or whatever. Stephen Covey once said that we listen to respond, not to understand, and therefore that we put ourselves at the center of the conversation. And what I sort of try to do is I try to genuinely listen. Now, the thing is that changes because of the form, because it can be 3 hours, that changes the content you're doing. And then because you are doing that kind of content, that changes the kind of thinking that you put into it and the approach that you take to it. And then that changes you as a person. So if I was, for example, working for a Republic TV or even an NDTV and I had to do a particular kind of content, if I had that particular kind of form, then I would do a particular kind of content and I would be a different person. So what you do actually is not something trivial. What you do actually shapes who you are as a person because you are thinking like that, your mental rhythms and all of that adapt to that.
I think that's so a lot of things to actually unpack in there, as you might say on your show. And I think that's the longest I've actually heard you go on talking for, because usually you just ask a gem of a question and then just sit back as your interviewee, as it were, gives the answer, which tends to be, and after a point of time you even forget, oh yeah, Amit had asked that question a long time back. He's just taken on the journey. And the Nilesh Mishra episode that you spoke about was one of my favorites. And in fact, I think it was after hearing that episode and the process of the slow interview, and I mean, yeah, that's kind of like what I wanted to do as well. But all right, let's just get this damn thing started, and that's really how I went about it. So quite a few things to actually unpack in over there, Amit. But I must mention this, I was just wrapped with attention with what you were saying, and I did not expect that image of you being an anchor at Republic TV to come out. It's so much so that I just, like, listeners can't see this obviously, I just threw a head back laughing, and my headphones actually just came out from the amplifiers. I had to plug it back in very quickly. It's interesting also that you spoke about the niches, and that's something that the internet has given us as a gift that we are born with. In fact, one of the stories that I can share is of a community like this that was born is, so I'm a big fan of progressive rock music, or prog as it is affectionately called by its fans. And there are certain in-jokes, obviously, because the genre lends itself to being made fun of, because it's long, and there are lots of tropes that you can make fun of it. And there's a group on Facebook called Prog Snob, right, which is like self-referential. Like, we are all obviously in it for the long songs and what have you, the Dream Theaters, Pink Floyds of the world and all that. And the interesting thing was, so I was a fan, and it's all about memes, it's all about the latest releases and stuff like that. So it's community in the truest sense, and obviously not started by a certain band or a label or something. It's just something that organically grew, something that can only grow out of the internet, right? Sometimes it's very heartwarming, sometimes it's very annoying. So one of the things I did was I printed out the logo of Prog Snob on this giant placard, right? Because one of my favorite bands were coming down to India in 2017. I think it was Hacken, progressive metal band from the UK. So I had gone and I had the opportunity to interact with them during the press conference because I knew the IIT guys and all that. So I went in, and the most amazing thing happened, which was, as after I got their autographs and everything, and after I was going out and we were all going towards the stage area, there was another guy wearing a Prog Snob t-shirt. And what you must know is, like, Prog Snob probably is a community of 50,000 people around the world. What are the chances that one guy in India, in Mumbai, in Powai, is one guy is holding a placard and one guy is wearing a t-shirt, both of which have been made and not purchased. I think the power of community, I think is just that, right? It's finding these niches. I just wanted to share that story. There's no real outcome or anything.
No, it's a mind-blowing story, and it's so heartening because, kids today take it for granted that their only communities are not the one that they are born into or geographically located in. You can form multiple communities of like-minded people and, in these different areas. And that's magical. That's miraculous for people of my generation growing up in the 80s and 90s. And these kids take this shit for granted. Yeah. I feel like going on an old man lecture now. You are so lucky.
But I did want to bring back the aspect of community for you, Amit, which was the community you said that you've built around the seen and the unseen. I think this was best elucidated not with some serious discussion or conversation or something like that, but something very frivolous, which was a Twitter thread that I made. I ordered two mugs that, I mean, the Seen and the Unseen now has merch. I ordered two mugs, being a fan of both Amit and his show and coffee. And I ordered, the coffee was not the first liquid that was drunk off that mug, I must let you, I must tell
I'm
you.
glad to hear it. Yeah.
And I made a thread which I genuinely thought like three people would understand, right? And it was all references to the show, the way Amit speaks, like you give out your, like all about instead, a whole bunch of very, very referential things that obviously only somebody who's heard not just one or two episodes, but possibly 10 episodes. And that is probably my most viral, if I may, thread of 2020. And I remember seeing the stats on that. That's some 70,000, 80,000 views on that, right? The impressions. And I think it's just so amazing that you have managed to build something, not just which is intellectually revered, but has so much going for it that there is a community forming around a stupid thread of jokes. I think I think more than anything else, that to me is a testament. So the community that you have sort of created, community and brand, if I may, that you kind of created. I want to ask you one of the things that I just want to pick on one of the things that you said. So very often in your answer right now and in the past as well, especially on the 200th episode that you did, which for people who haven't heard, it was a mammoth episode where Amit was the guest and he was being asked questions about his show. And I thought that was a wonderful experience. You often spoke about research and feedback that you get from your fans and things like that. I'm just curious to know how you go about doing that. How do you go about gathering feedback? Yeah, there's stuff that the stats and the backend tells you, obviously, but I'm assuming that your decisions are guided more by qualitative anecdotes and quotes rather than just numbers and graphs. Or am I mistaken?
No, you're absolutely right in the sense that I don't look at the numbers at all. I mean, I know what the numbers are. Like whenever I'm uploading an episode, my show is hosted on Libsyn. So whenever I'm uploading an episode, I enter Libsyn and the stats are right there in front. But I decided very early on that I'm not going to look at the metrics. And another reason for that is early on, I thought these metrics are low. Then later I realized that they're not low, that they're different. And they're different in the sense that, for me, 10,000 downloads of an episode are like way more important than like 10 million hits of a YouTube video because the engagement is way greater. Like the average amount of time that someone listens to an episode of The Seen and the Unseen, the average user session rather is 40 minutes, which is insane, which is off the charts. You tell that to a YouTuber, they'll just have a convulsion and they'll probably just collapse there or something. So that's there. And part of, and as far as getting feedback is concerned, I don't solicit it. People just say what they say on Twitter, and you've experienced a little bit of the love that people give. So people will often say stuff like, one guy sent me a message. So I had a show where I chatted with someone and they were like, and my show notes are very exhaustive because I want to make it a rabbit hole that people, I want to create various rabbit holes there that people can go down. And whenever somebody mentions a book, I'll obviously put a link in the show notes. So this was the guest had mentioned some 30 books and I had linked to all of them. And within an hour of the episode releasing, this friend and fan writes to me saying that, listen, there's one link you forgot to put. And there were like 40 links in that freaking episode. And there's one link you forgot to put. And, please put it because, otherwise other people might complain. So that's the sort of level of ownership that people feel for it. And it ties back to what you said earlier about community. And it also ties back to how podcasting is different from radio. Like if you look at, radio is broadcasting because you're going broad, right? Which is why people will project their voices and they'll speak in particular ways and it doesn't have a personal feel to it. Podcasting is personal. If you're listening to a podcast, that person's voice is in your head, right? It's personal, it's intimate. There's no other medium that gives you that kind of intimacy. And that intimacy also means, and especially if people are like, one of my listeners said that, dude, I have your voice in my head for 3 hours every week. I don't even listen to my wife that much. And so I have been surprised for various reasons this year by the depth of feeling that people have for the show. And I lucked into it. Okay, so it's not like I got into podcasting and I thought, yeah, it's an intimate medium, depth karenge, 3 ghanta karenge and all of that bullshit. I just completely lucked into it, was very surprised by what there is. And then that also kind of makes you feel responsible that, there's no episode where I can wing it. I have to give it everything. If I wing it, people will know. it's very clear. It's, you have to be straightforward, not just with the guests, but realizing that your listeners are out there. And in a sense, because the show maps my intellectual journey, I'm very often thinking aloud in these episodes. Sometimes I'll ask the same question over multiple episodes to different people, not because I'm necessarily interested in their answer, though of course I am, but also because I really want to find out. I really want to figure it out for myself. So, in a sense, intellectually, you could almost say that over this period of time, I've been naked on the show, in a sense, that, and thank God it's an audio show, therefore. And people get it and they react that way. So there is that sense of, and that sense of intimacy, or I know this person, is not something creepy. Because when I then take a step back and think of the podcast that I listened to, like with Russ Roberts, who was, on my show also earlier this year in one of my absolute favorite episodes, because we were talking about conversation, and that's something that we spent a lot of time both doing and thinking about. So that was great. But when I think of the people that I listen to, Russ Roberts, Sam Harris, Dan Carlin of Hardcore History, you do feel that sense that I know this person, I know where this person is coming from, and all of that. So that's a remarkable thing. And as for feedback, the point is, like, one feedback, whenever someone discovers the show for the first time, they might react with, why is it so long? Why can't you cut it up into half an hour segments and all of that? So that I happily ignore, because I figure that if they listen to a few more episodes, they'll get it. No regular listener is going to ask that question. But sometimes I take it very seriously. For example, the reason I cut out the dream sequences is because a number of people said they don't work, but Krish Ashok was the first one who very forcefully said that no, it's a nice serious show and these dream sequences mess it up. And I kind of agreed with him. And now when I listen to those episodes, it makes me cringe a little bit. So if you have an issue with dream sequences not being there, kindly take it up with Ashok.
I hope to have him on soon, and I will take this up. I will take up this issue. Thanks so much for that. I want to talk a little bit about your reading, because I think that's something that, apart from podcasts, is kind of synonymous with you. I mean, the sheer number of books that you recommend per episode. I mean, one could have a media diet that's entirely based on Amit Varma, right? You listen to the podcast and then you spend the next week devouring the books and the other shows that you recommend, the links that you put up. That's kind of astonishing. So I have multiple questions with respect to reading, and this is something that I myself have kind of struggled with, and I'm sure a lot of people have asked you as well. So two questions over here. One is, how do you read? So, in the sense, do you have any specific techniques, or do you read differently for pleasure versus your research for the seen and the unseen versus, say, just the news, for instance? And kind of like the second part of that is, I suppose that you can say that you have the excuse of doing research for your show, just like people in digital marketing can say that, when they spend time on Facebook, it's for professional purposes and they're researching. But for the average listener, like you rightly said, day job, possibly an evening job, or just a few hours for reading, what is kind of like one to do? So it's kind of like a two-part question on reading, really, that I have.
Yeah, so I'll tackle the first part first, but first, in the spirit of how I like to have conversations, I'll take a brief digression. And I had written a column about this once, but so which is based on an anecdote that a friend of Narendra Modi told me about Narendra Modi, which is that she used to work with him in Gujarat in the first decade of this century, which is, you can't call it the 2000s, I feel, because that feels like you're talking about the century, but to say aughties or whatever also feels odd, but whatever, circa 2007 8. And she said that she and a bunch of friends were, a small group of friends, maybe 4 or 5 people, were at his house one day, at Modi's house, and he started telling them a story about how when he was a kid, his mother was very ill one day, and she was feeling very hot and sweaty. So he went to switch on the fan, and then as he flicked the switch, he realized that there was no electricity. And as he said this, he started crying, right? So that's a story I heard. And my friend's point in telling me this story was that Modi's approach towards the world is very experiential. If he's experienced something, he understands it. Which is why when he became Chief Minister of Gujarat, one of the first things he said was, I will make sure every village in Gujarat has electricity. Right? So, because he gets it, So, someone like that will have experienced personally, viscerally, the importance of electricity, the importance of cleanliness, the importance of roads. So they'll take those things seriously. However, at a larger level, there are certain things you cannot experience. Abstract concepts that you need to master when it comes to public policy. For example, how markets work, which is very counterintuitive in terms of, spontaneous order, the positive sum nature of market interactions, very counterintuitive, or how economies work, and so on and so forth. And he doesn't know them. Now, the thing is, one of the reasons he doesn't know them, of course, is that he doesn't read much, which is not his fault. He is not from a privileged background. One doesn't have access to books. So, therefore, you would assume that when you get to a position of power, you will surround yourself with experts who do have that knowledge and then use that to guide you, which in my contention he hasn't really done. But from what my friend was saying, and I wrote a column about this a long time back, it seemed to me that he was an aankhon dekhi prime minister. Now, the point is, how do the rest of us get around this? The rest of us get around this by reading. What we experience of the world is very limited. And if we just rely on that, our knowledge of the world will be minuscule. So, how do we paint a picture of the world? We understand the world and we paint a picture of it by joining dots. So, the more dots we have, the better our picture will be. How do we gather dots? The best way to gather dots, the easiest way to gather dots is by reading, which is why, I think that reading is just fundamentally important. And I was fortunate to have a reading habit because I had that kind of privileged childhood where I was surrounded by books and therefore I could just pick up a book at any point in time and start reading. Others don't, but whatever it is, you have to think about how you're going to get this knowledge. At this point, I will put a caveat and say that, reading snobs will often say that, why are you watching TV? Why are you watching YouTube? Reading is the highest form and all of that. And I don't think that's entirely true either. I think there are many ways of gaining knowledge and we should not mock any of them. And those could include listening to podcasts. Those could include watching YouTube videos. Like our friend Krish Ashok mentioned that he watches YouTube videos on 3x. So YouTube only allows 2.2x, but he has some app that allows him to watch at 3x. And I get that because I watch a lot of YouTube as well, which is, I'll go down these rabbit holes and there is some great content there for those who want it. But to come back to reading, therefore, how I sort of read is that my reading I wouldn't divide it into a sort of pleasure and research, because in any case, if I'm doing an episode, it's because I want to do the episode, and therefore whatever research is not necessarily unpleasurable. I would divide it into fiction and non-fiction and say that when I read fiction, I am going for an immersive experience. I might read a little more slowly out of choice, and I won't take notes, obviously. But when I read non-fiction, even if I'm not reading for research, I try to take notes. I might scribble on a physical book if I have a physical book, or I might on a Kindle, I'll do a lot of highlighting. Yeah, and if I'm reading for research, I'll, open a Rome research document, which is the app I use for, organizing my thoughts these days, and write it down there. And I think that helps. And even though I'm a fast reader, faster than many people, I don't speed read in the sense of I don't skim and I don't try to take in, chunks of words at a time or whatever. I really want to absorb whatever I can. But I read fast. And the trick there is that it is just a question of habit. Like, as a kid, I was a voracious reader, but I lost that habit in adulthood. So when I was getting back to it, maybe 5, 6 years ago, initially it's tough. You can set a particular hour in the day and say, okay, between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m., I will only read. And it's tough. Your mind is wandering, you're damn bored, and all of that shit. But once you sort of get into the habit, it becomes easier. You lose concentration less, you lose you're kind of processing more, you're reading faster, and and horror of horrors, when you're bored, instead of your smartphone, sometimes you'll reach out for a book. So I think for people who want to build a reading habit, one, you should certainly try to do it, and two, you should persevere and not kind of give up at some point in time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. All right. If you are an intellectual or if you want to read or if you're a smart person, then books are the places to go to. So if I look at my own media diet, and I don't consider myself an idiot necessarily, I'd like to think that I know a reasonable bit, especially since I've been following the news closely and been listening to a lot of podcasts, etc. So my media diet over the last, I think, say 4 or 5 years is when I really started getting into a lot of this, has actually been less books and more, say, things like Medium, for instance, which I am a big fan of. I've found some exceptional writing from all topics, from politics to economics to progressive rock on Medium. Then there's podcasts like yours, for instance. And then there are other things like op-eds and things like that I tend to subscribe to. So one is kind of like, is it legit for this base of knowledge not necessarily to be in this physical encapsulation that is a book, be it a physical book or a Kindle, which itself draws a lot of debates by itself, but let's not try to get there. But is there a disadvantage or an advantage to shifting your locus, if I may, to from books? You're getting knowledge from, what if a person growing up, their diet of acquiring knowledge was not books at all? Maybe books is just 5%, and most of it actually tends to be podcasts, proper YouTube videos, and maybe even the right TikTok mediums or op-ed articles, whatever the case may be. I'm very curious to know what you think about the changing landscape of where knowledge could come from a medium point of view.
Yeah, that's a very deep and insightful question. So I'll get a little meta again. And I'll say that, look, there is knowledge in the world, and then there has to be a way of getting that knowledge down, and then a way of consuming that knowledge. And those are technologies. So a book is a technology, a YouTube video is a technology, a podcast is a technology, but it has no inherent value in and of itself. It's a knowledge that has a value, and that's kind of what matters. And what you said about Medium is what I feel about Substack today, in fact. Now, a number of things. One is that we sometimes confuse the form for the actual content, and that's something we have to get past. Like, I remember when Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize, I wrote a column in the Times arguing that it was actually an honor for the prize, not for Dylan. And what I wanted to get past that is that when you speak of literature is not physical printed books. Literature is words. Back in the day, those words could come from oral traditions. Shakespeare, who is worshipped by all people who care about literature and is considered high literature, wasn't actually writing on paper. He was writing his plays to be performed by actors. So it is the words that matter and what they contain that matter. And therefore, if you look at Dylan's impact over a period of time, he was as worthy a recipient as anyone else you could have given it to. So I'll come up with a counterpoint to that, but this is one point, that just ignore what the technology of transmission or storage is. What is important is what is the content and what is the knowledge and what are the words. Having said that, the mode of transmission also matters. For example, in my podcasting course, one of the things that I teach my students is that writing for audio involves paying attention to how people are listening. For example, when you're reading something on a page, you can take in a complex sentence, you can read it again. If you didn't understand, your eyes can go back. If you use a phrase like the latter, the reader can reverse and see what are the two things mentioned and what is this person mean by latter. Though you shouldn't make a reader reverse even in a written piece, which is why I tell my writing students that never use the latter or as previously mentioned or pun not intended and all that. In audio, you cannot do that. It's very linear. You're listening. And therefore, in audio, if you're writing for audio, typically, you are sometimes forced to go one piece of information at a time, that a sentence should only do one thing. So, for example, and here I'm sort of thinking off the top of my head, but let's say there is a news piece that the famous podcaster Deepak Chak Gopalakrishnan was found running through the streets naked after he lost this prop bet with Amit Varma, the man behind the famous Seen and the Unseen podcaster, which blah, 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 right? So it's a very complicated sentence. And by the time the listener gets here, you're processing so many things. You're processing that there is a chap called Deepak and he does this podcast and he was talking to another podcaster, Amit, who does that podcast, and they lost a prop bet and you haven't even gotten to what the prop bet was and so on and so forth. So if you're rewriting that for radio, you typically have to start with that, maybe just start with the vision of the naked man running through Marine Drive and then say it is Deepak and then say Deepak, lost a prop bet and so on. So you go. So in audio, the dictum is you go one piece of information at a time. Now, the thing again is that if you're going one piece of information at a time, that shapes your content, that shapes the complexity of thought that is possible, that shapes what you can handle. So whichever form that you choose will have its own kind of imperatives. But I think that is largely a subtle point that matters on the margins. In general, I would say that if you're taking in information and you're taking in knowledge, it doesn't really matter where you do it from. Knowledge is knowledge. Even a lot of books, you will see a lot of these non-fiction books that come out nowadays is like someone wrote something on Medium, for example, or Substack, and it's got one good idea. And then publisher says, what a good idea, make a book out of it. So they'll have 20 pages, which is worth reading, and 200 pages of random examples and elaborations, which is not required. And maybe you could have gotten it more crisply from, say, a TED talk. Some TED talks have been turned into books of this sort. So I would say that I don't want to get snobbish about knowledge or how you receive knowledge. It's the receiving knowledge that matters. And some of us who read might, assume that reading is as accessible to everybody. Even in this day and age, books are kind of expensive, if not in terms of actual money. And of course, there are libgen and all that, but they're expensive in terms of time. Time is money. Are you going to take 3 hours to read something, or are you going to watch 5 YouTube talks on it at double speed and take in the same kind of information? And I try not to be, I think everyone should read. It's a good idea, but it's okay. If you can't read, listen to a podcast at double speed. YouTube has a lot of great content, though it also has a lot of time pass rabbit holes that will, suck up your life and all of that. But yeah, so that's broadly my take on it, which I think you would agree with, right?
I do. There's a lot of it that I agree with, actually, and there's a couple of things that I want to mention over here. But before that, can we all just agree that the podcast scandals is something that's never ever going to make it to mainstream media? And I think it is actually going to take one of us actually running through the streets of Mahim in our birthday suits to actually get some attention to podcasting as a whole. But leaving that aside, I think one of the things that there are a couple of things that I wanted to mention. You spoke something about the whole latter thing, and that reminded me of two things. Two very specific pieces of writing by two of my favorite authors of all time. One is an English gentleman called P.G. Woodhouse. And P.G. Woodhouse, try as anybody may, and that includes the talents of Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie. Nobody could translate Woodhouse's words into any other medium. You can argue that that's less a criticism of actors and more a testament to how that was, made for writing. I remember there was one, I forget which story or novel this was from, but there was somebody who had, his name was L.L. something, Leighton something, LL, one of those. Fotheringay Phipps, yes, that was it. Fotheringay Phipps, and it was FF. Now, both the F's were small letters. So, Fotheringay Phipps asked somebody, and both the F's were small letters, and then Fotheringay Phipps replied the person with capital F's, his delicate ears detecting the capitals. Now, how do you translate something like that, right? And the second one is another one of my favorite writers, and I'm guessing yours as well, Ananda Ramachandran. Somebody who we have referenced earlier. This Anand used to run an astounding blog called Son of Bozy, which I think was the finest satire to have ever come out of India. And he used to do, again, he would do things that were made for the written medium. I think the first time I laughed out loud reading something was when Anand wrote something like Priya something of previous paragraph fame. Now, who has ever said previous paragraph fame? He would do absurd things like that. And, so one point that I want to kind of like sum up this whole thing and just add on to the point that you also made when in my advertising life, one of the things that we kept, going and telling clients was, and I worked in digital, so it was always a headache to make them consider this newfangled medium. Apparently, in 2015, digital is still a newfangled medium, but you have to tell them stop taking your billboards, resizing them, and putting that up on Facebook, because that's not what's going to work on Facebook. If you're going to be on Facebook, create something for that medium. Similarly, for Instagram stories, it's not just a matter of resizing what you have on Facebook. Now you have to make something for that medium, so on and so forth. And just taking another industry completely different from this, and I promise you, Amit, that there is a common conclusion to all of where I'm getting to. 2 days back, I recorded another podcast with two very good friends of mine, Peter and Animesh, and that was a metal show. They do, and actually, this is a nice example of the niches that you were talking about. 2 years back, they were wondering whether there was space for an Indian metal podcast. And I said, just go ahead and do it, man. And I've been very happy. They've done close to 150 episodes and they're recorded with some of the biggest metal musicians around the world, and they've got a fair following and stuff like that. And on that show as well, so you might be, I'm not sure how much of a music fan you are enough to tune into all these live shows that are happening, these live streamed gigs that are happening right now. And a lot of them, Amit, are just the webcams switched on to a bunch of musicians playing in a jam room. And while that's nice, it's nice to see the band that's playing because you can't do anything else. The thing is, that's really, it doesn't feel like something special for the digital medium. Whereas I think that there is so much more that this medium, rather than acting as a constraint, can actually be a catalyst for. And I always use the analogy of what sports broadcast was to live sports. There was a point of time when live sports was the thing, and not everybody could go down to the stadium. And rather than just have two cameras onto the stadium, they added commentary, they added on-screen stats, and now, of course, I'm guessing you have premium packages that allow you to choose your angle and stuff like that as well. And I believe something like that could happen for this as well. I think the common point that I'm trying to make from these three examples together is quite simply just optimize for the medium. So if you have a strain of knowledge or something that you want to convey, a thought that you want to convey, art or knowledge or whatever the case may be, sure, you can. If you're going to do it on books, then there's a certain way in which you do it. You don't read that out verbatim onto a podcast. If you're doing podcasts, then you optimize for that medium. Basically, if you're conveying that information now in 10-second TikTok, now the approach has to be completely different. So the reason I went on that long-winded ramble was to arrive at three words: is basically optimize for medium. And I think you might agree with that.
No, I totally agree with that. And in fact, it isn't such a long ramble at all, because there are so many interesting things that you said that I want to pick up on. First of all, PG Woodhouse. When I sort of teach my writing class, I always have this quote early on from George Orwell, where he says that good prose is like a window pane. And the point that he's making there is that, look, what is a function of a window pane? A function of a window pane is to show you what's on the other side. It is not supposed to get in the way and show you what a lovely window pane it is. I am such a clever window pane. I am the most delectable window pane. So prose should do the same, that it should show you what's on the other side. But the one honorable exception to this I point out is Mr. Woodhouse himself, so beloved by all Indians, because so beloved by all elite Indians of a certain age, rather. Because so many of the things that he did with the language were delightful in and of themselves, which is why you can't really translate that to TV or film or whatever, because how do you? It's all about the joy in the prose itself. So to take the window pane metaphor further, it's like those beautiful window panes in European churches with painted frescoes on them. But only Woodhouse can, one, not everybody wants to do something like that. And two, nobody can be Woodhouse. He was like a mad outlier. Though I completely share your admiration of Ananda Ramachandran, son of Bozi, Big Fat Phoenix. What an incredibly funny guy, my God. So yeah, the funniest person in India?
I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. I mean, there are so many metrics. I once called him the finest satirist in India, and he said, Macha, stop saying things like this. I think he was very self-effacing. It would have been interesting, actually, to see. I think this is a conversation that we need to have with Anand at some point of time. I want to go back to Woodhouse and say something controversial, though, and it's likely that I'm going to lose subscribers before I have them already. Because I think Woodhouse's stories by themselves, storylines by themselves, are fairly mediocre. There was really nothing separating one Bertie story from the other. It was fairly predictable in terms of what the plot was going to be. But when you're, in Woodhouse, it's all about the prose. It's like you said, he's one of those mad outliers, right? It's really, really just all about the pros. Yeah, I think we've covered a fair bit of.
But I want to go back.
You wanted to ask something. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to go back to is that very valid point about how people have an ossified way of thinking about a particular medium and they don't adjust. And this goes beyond medium. Like, for example, one of the main arguments I'm making in Hacking Cricket, which hopefully will be an actual physical book soon and not just something that I talk about, is that we look at T20 cricket through a lens through which is appropriate for one-day cricket. In the same way that, when one-day cricket first began in the 60s and 70s, it was, people played it like it was test cricket. They didn't get it. They didn't get the imperatives. And then over time, it became more and more aggressive and people began to figure out the medium. And the same argument about T20 cricket. And the thing is, I realized while thinking about this, that this is true of all human activity. That, I just finished recording an episode about the age of pandemics with Chinmay Tumbe, who's written a great book on it, which will be out, before people listen to this. And he makes a point that, one of the pandemics in India, like people say there were 6 cholera pandemics in India in the 19th century. And actually, he says it was just one long drawn out pandemic, not 6. But the interesting thing here is that for most of this time, people did not know it was a waterborne disease. Now, in 1847, a dude writes a paper saying it's waterborne, right? And no one takes him seriously, and they're doing all kinds of things and building temples and bloodletting and all kinds of nonsense is happening. This was in 1849. In 1887, almost 40 years later, another dude not only writes a paper, but he has a diagram in it which reminds me of the, there have been these studies recently about how COVID spreads in a restaurant, where you have a map of a restaurant and you have different tables and people are showing airflows and all of that. He did a similar thing in a village where he pointed out two wells and then he drew maps of all the cases around it and the intensity of the cases. And he proved that it was so correlated to the location of those two wells that it was obviously the water. And therefore, he said that you should have, the government should spend money on pumps and all of that because water is a problem. Not taken seriously. 50, 60 years pass in which tens of millions of people are literally dying where they are not taking this kind of stuff seriously because conventional wisdom is something different. Like to stay with medicine, you look back at someone like Ignaz Semmelweis, who was that famous doctor who eventually, I think, died in an asylum or whatever. He died, he had a sad and lonely life, who first pointed out in the middle of the 19th century that a lot of people die in hospitals because people are not washing their hands. As simple as that. And he was ignored, ridiculed, ostracized. I mean, to the extent that he could have been a podcaster today. He was, all of these things happened to him. And no one gave a shit about him for fucking decades while people kept dying in hospitals because they didn't think washing hands was important. Okay. So the point is that whenever shifts happen, people take time to adjust. And what has happened in the last 30 years is that these are not shifts happening. The pace of shifts happening has just exponentially gone to a whole different level. Like I think in the last 30 years, you've had more change than maybe in any 30, easily in any 100-year period in history, in fact. And people haven't coped with it. Like you said, your digital marketing people will put their newspaper hoarding on Facebook and their Facebook ad on Instagram and so on. And I see that happening across medium. I see that happening in journalism, for example, where the way people sort of discover and consume media has changed completely, but not a single journalistic publication in this country has figured it out. They are still doing the old things in the old way. So there is always this massive lag that happens. And therefore, whenever someone tells me an idea that seems outrageous prima facie, or whenever people are doing things which, to my middle-aged mind seem like, like what the is this? I always prompt myself to kind of take a step back and not rush to judgment. Right. And I think that's what people have to do about everything in their lives, with regards to sort of whatever they do, and always be careful that they're not sort of bound by convention, because convention gives you comfort, right? Conventional ways of thinking are easy because that's why they're conventional ways of thinking. You can default to them. And it's, I think, important for us to always kind of keep re-examining our reflexive ways of approaching anything.
No, well said, Amit. I think there's so much over there that you said in terms of, not taking a medium at face value and not taking maybe even a creator at face value. And I was just, again, this will delight you. It just seems that all the stars are falling, all the right references are falling today. I was reading again, forgive me for going back to metal, but there was this R&B TikToker famous for doing R&B covers or just songs and things like that. And she was wearing a Metallica t-shirt. And if there's one thing that you should know about the metal community is that they are a bunch of snoots with a lot of stuff stuck up their behinds. And they're like, oh, name 3 Metallica songs. And she went on TikTok and she said, okay, I was asked to name 3 Metallica songs, but I thought what would be better is if I play them. She took out an electric guitar and I kid you not, she riffed through 3 of the toughest songs that Metallica has. And she ended by saying, see, listen, just because I do R&B doesn't mean that I can't appreciate or I can't listen to. I thought that was beautiful. It just shut down all the trolls just like that. And that was absolutely delightful. I'll send you the link, of course, purely for academic reasons. We can't view them here in India, of course.
Yeah. In fact, so purely for academic reasons, you should put them in your show notes.
Purely for academic
for foreign listeners. For foreign listeners.
Amit, I want to we have spoken a little bit about reading and stuff like that. Now, I want to get back to you a little bit, which is, I don't know how you see your own, content creation and life in the last few years, but distinctly there seem to be 2 eras, right? There's the India Uncut era, and then now there's a Seen and the Unseen era. In fact, now when I was searching for Amit Varma interview just to see what other people have asked in the past before, I couldn't get past any reference of the Seen and the Unseen. It's like these are 2 completely different eras, and I would like to think 2 completely different fan bases as well. I'm assuming there'll be some crossover. I must admit, I have read very little of India Uncut. I will admit that, and I am a Amit Varma stan purely because of the work that you have done on the Seen and the Unseen. How has the shift personally been for you? And sort of like a larger question then would be, Suppose there's somebody who's steeped in legacy, right? And this actually might have a weird segue from the previous, connect with the previous question. Suppose there's somebody who's like, yeah, man, I've invested so much in this. Now, this could be a medium, it could be a topic, it could be a career, it could be anything. And you can very clearly see either the winds are changing or you personally want to go somewhere else. How has the shift been for you? And do you have any advice for somebody who might want to do anything from starting something new to changing tack with respect to career or anything of that sort, really?
Yeah, great question. And the interesting thing is that this was, you make it sound like I had a plan. That now I'm on India Uncut, now I'll segue into this because the winds are changing and blah, blah, blah. But it wasn't planned at all. I think what happened with India Uncut was, so it was active between 2003, 2004, and about 2008, 2009. I used to do 5 posts a day, did about 8,000 posts in those years. And then I kind of stopped. And it so happens that around the time I stopped, the age of blogging came to an end as well. And that's partly because all the functions of blogging were disaggregated by the various social media, where Twitter took over the filter functions, and Facebook and Instagram in different ways took over the personal post function, and blah, blah, blah. All of that happened. But that's not why I stopped. The reason I stopped was that I started playing poker, started enjoying it, and thought, okay, I'm going to play this professionally. And I did that for 5 years. And then when I came back out of poker and decided I want to kind of get back to writing, I realized that the entire brand equity or whatever that I'd built up with India Uncut really wasn't there. There was a new age of social media. Twitter was everything. I didn't even have too many Twitter followers because I had completely missed that wave when people were kind of gathering Twitter followers. So I was suddenly kind of, I didn't have that kind of following, barring a few random people who might remember the India Uncut days and all of that, which was fine. And it was pretty big in those days in the sense that, back in the peak of India Uncut, I used to, when I stopped, I used to get about like 20,000 page views a day. There were weeks where if something went really viral, I remember early on when the blog really took off, I had like 1 million page views in a week. And when I was kind of live blogging the tsunami about that period. So, but then I come back and again, there's nothing really happening. And I was okay with it. I had to remind myself that don't feel entitled to this and just move on and do the things you want. And it's not like I wanted to recapture any of that. I didn't even want to blog again because I just didn't feel it. I wanted to write books and all of that. So I wasn't too interested in that. And then the seen and the unseen happened. And then it built up in its own organic way. Now, the big lesson in that, which is, when you speak of advice, when you ask what advice I would give to young creators, the big lesson in that is that I didn't plan the way it would turn out. Like, I didn't even know the freaking medium. I didn't even listen to podcasts. I just went with it. And then my policy always is that you should enjoy what you do. The ideal kind of life is when you wake up in the morning and you look forward to what you're going to do that day. That's, and not everyone is lucky enough to be able to have that, but that's what you want to do. So, for more than 100 episodes, I didn't make any money off the show. And then there were little dribbly little bits coming in. And it is only really this year that things have gotten better and that's coming in. But so the important thing as a creator always that do what you love. If you do what you don't love, then the validation will mean a lot to you and the validation will not come early. And therefore you'll get frustrated and give it up. And my big lesson here is, they often say about science fiction writers and forecasters that they tend to overestimate the short term and underestimate the long term. And I think creators do that. They overestimate the short term where they think that I will come out with this podcast or this YouTube channel and all that. And in 6 months, I'll be a superstar and people will be mobbing me on the streets and blah, blah, blah. And none of that shit ever happens. Like, there's this very fine YouTuber who does productivity videos called Ali Abdal. And Ali Abdal recently had this video about when he reached 1 million subscribers. And over there, he speaks about how, when he first when he first started his channel, he thought even having 1,000 subscribers is crazy because 1,000 real people watching what you do. So guess when he reached 1,000 subscribers, when he had been on YouTube for 6 months and done 50 videos. So 50 freaking videos, and imagine the kind of effort is going into producing an actual video, and he makes 50 freaking videos and he reaches 1,000 subscribers. But the point being that he doesn't lose hope and say, what is the point and life has no meaning and I will do something else and I will rant and rage and take it out on somebody on Twitter and all of that. He perseveres and he keeps doing them. And then you have that little exponential growth. Now, the thing is that exponential growth is common to every creator. Okay, you look at Joe Rogan getting 100 million from Spotify. Listen, where was he 15 years back? How did this show start? What were the early years like? The point is, you do something you love, you keep doing it. Two things happen. One is, the more you keep doing something over a period of time, the greater the chances that people will discover you and it will grow organically. But the second, which is more important in my view, is that the more you do something, the better you get at it. Right? So, it's kind of you to say the nice things you did about the seen and the unseen, but my early episodes, frankly, I can't listen to them now. They make me cringe. But the thing is that if you just keep iterating, you get better and better and better and better. So, my advice to anybody starting off today as a creator would be, number one, do something you love, so that even if no one says this is good, no one watches it, no one cares about it, at least you care about it. And that is your payback, and that's where you get the satisfaction from. And then if it's worth, and my sense is that, look, if anyone perseveres with doing something that they love doing, it has to pay off, which is again why, as much as they overestimate the short term, they can underestimate the long term, and you have to play the long game.
Well said, Amit. In fact, one of the you changed my perspective on one thing. And again, forgive me for I constantly go back to music references because that's where my a lot of my interests come from. Many people think that Pink Floyd was a great band off the bat. You think of, I mean, I'm sure even somebody who doesn't get into music as much will know that, say, The Dark Side of the Moon and all that were seminal albums at the point. But the interesting thing is, Dark Side of the Moon, which is the first big album, actually fell into the second half of their career. It was technically their eighth album, which means that they had a period of about close to 10 years to muck around and find their sound. And one of the laments of modern day music is that scope for experimentation isn't there anymore. You're expected to be incredible right off the bat. Your debut album has to be amazing. In fact, I think I was joking with somebody yesterday about something, saying, no, man, these days everybody's expected to be great off the bat. So there is no hope in the 20th century for Pink Floyd or Marwan Atapattu. Because he that's a very, very
or poor Prithvi Shaw for that matter.
Or Prithvi Shaw for that matter. But the reason I say that is, you make me think now, okay, so sure, maybe in the world of music that doesn't work anymore because of economics and incentives. But there are other spaces where you could possibly try this. Get onto a YouTube channel and muck around for 10 years and maybe then find your voice or find your sound or whatever the case may be. So it's not like, musicians have to be beholden to record labels who want hit albums right off the bat every time. So it's kind of fascinating. There is both, as always, opportunity as well. I mean, every era has its own sort of like plus or minus. Although I do think that a band like Floyd would have found it very difficult to survive in 2021. Last couple of things that I want to ask Amit. Actually, there were quite a few things, but I think we've covered.
But I'll interject and I'll say that there is actually a profound aphorism in there.
Yeah.
That to find your dark side of the moon, you first have to do Piper at the Gates of Dawn.
Well said.
Right. So yeah. So that's of course, apologies to those who think Piper was better. But yeah, and you're right. And I think that's also a reason, if I can quickly add this little bit here, that creators have to look beyond platforms.
Yeah.
That if you're doing something for a platform, then executives at platforms who are not creators themselves and who are most of the time relatively clueless and have never created something of value, they'll have outdated conventional notions of what success is and unreasonable expectations and not understand the artistic process, and you will never have the space to grow and flourish and get to wherever you could potentially go. And I think in this modern age, creators actually can get past platforms, and therefore you should be open to just striking out on your own, and if you're able to, and thinking in those terms.
Absolutely. You lied to me, Amit. You told me that you were not much of a music fan, but if you know Piper at the Gates of Dawn, then you're put into another category.
Yeah, but unlike the hip hop star you named, if you ask me to name 5 songs from the album, I won't be able to come with a guitar and play them for you.
Enough. But the point you make is an important one, because Dark Side of the Moon wouldn't have happened if it weren't for Piper. I think you need to, basically, for those who don't know the references, and I don't want to get into that because that will turn an already long episode into even longer episode. The point is, you need to make those early mistakes, I guess. You need to, and I think you mentioned it on your show as well, don't be embarrassed about the early mistake. I mean, they're a part of the evolution. You need to go through all that. You need to make those early mistakes in order to, eventually get to the dark side of the moon, as it were. And I guess that's something that you would resonate with and that you would agree with. One question I want to ask you: so you consume a lot of content. I also found that one of the things that really strikes me of the seen and the unseen is how you're able to draw in references from past episodes, past questions, past, oh, I asked the same question to this person, and then just draw that in. I'm just curious to know how, if you thought of this at all, and maybe it's just an inherent gift. How do you map information in your head? Obviously, some of it comes from books, some of it comes from podcasts, some of it comes from your own thoughts. How do you map this, all this knowledge in your head?
I don't and I can't. None of us can, in the sense that, Tiago Forte has this concept of the second brain, which is based on the point that our human brain is not wired to store knowledge in a systematic way. We'll take in little bits of knowledge here and there. We can be creative. We can, whatever, think in all kinds of lateral ways, but it is not a good assembler of knowledge per se. And therefore, that's where the phrase second brain comes from, that you then use software to build what he calls a second brain. And though he was much more into, I think, earlier software, and he was into Evernote. I think I haven't actually done his course, which is madly expensive or whatever. But what I use as what I've started using for a month and a half as my sort of second brain is this software called Rome Research, which allows two things. One is it allows nested sort of lists, so you can, if this was a video podcast, I'd actually kind of demonstrate that. And apart from that, it allows bi-directional linking. So for example, if I were to put transcripts of all my episodes on Rome Research, I'd be able to see exactly in how many of them I had used the phrase incentives or asked a particular question to a guest and all of that. But these are very early days for me in terms of knowledge management. So far, I've been doing the boring linear thing of having pages and pages of notes on Microsoft Word. So if the guest says something and I say that, oh, I had a note about this, but where the is the note? How do I find it now? And I'll go frantic. Whereas, there are better ways to organize it, like Rome Research or Notion or whatever, different apps. And so that's kind of what I use. But the other thing is, often during an episode, you'll find me quoting from the book or remembering a past episode or whatever. The truth is that my memory is horrible, medium term and long term, but my short term memory is excellent. And what typically happens is that whenever I'm doing an episode, whatever I need to read regarding the episode, the books or whatever, I'll do it in the couple of days before the recording. So it's fresh in my mind. I have the notes in front of me. So it'll appear that, oh my God, he is, यहाँ से ये quote कर दिया, वहाँ से वो quote कर दिया. But actually, they are the notes. They're not in my head. I would have forgotten them in a week's time. And when I remember what I have asked somebody in some episode and all that, fine, I've done those episodes, so I would remember little bits of it. But even there, very often I've forgotten entire, I was doing an episode just now on the age of pandemics with Chinmay Tumbe, and I had to go back to the previous episode I did with him, which was just, a year back, to see, okay, what did I ask him about his personal life and his sort of his growing up and all of that, which I don't want to repeat here, obviously. So I didn't remember it off the bat. I had to kind of go back and, listen to that bit again to see, I don't want to ask him the same freaking question, because even if I don't remember, he might, and the listeners might. The listeners certainly will. There's no question about that. So yeah, that's
Fair enough. Last couple of questions now, Amit. One is, you always struck me as somebody who's extremely open-minded, and in terms of the content not just in terms of content, but also in terms of just general outlook in life. And I can't think of anybody better to ask this question. What personal metrics do you think somebody who is, say, in their 20s should have for themselves? Because usually when I try to search for answers for things like this, it usually is like, okay, you should save X amount of money. Okay, but what if I don't want to be the type of person who wants to save money, or for whatever reason it may be? Another person might say, make sure you have as many experiences as you can in your 30s. But okay, fair enough. But, is it just experiences for the sake of, chalking up a number? Right. A few years back, I got in this habit. I must listen to 100 albums every month or something, and then I realized it became a chore rather than enjoying music, which kind of killed the whole point of it in the first place. I'm just curious to know from you, what metrics would you recommend to somebody that or even like in life, really?
I'll get meta again. I would say that if you're someone in your 20s and you want to think about your future, don't think about it in the terms of what you want to do. think about it in the terms of the person you want to be. And the person you want to be, not in a career sense or achievement sense, but the person you want to be. Like, for example, let's say that you want to read. Now, don't set a target for yourself that I'll read so many books a month or so many books a week or whatever. Instead, cultivate a self image of yourself as someone, say, for example, as, a self taught polymath who reads a lot, who knows a lot about many things. And when you have that self image, your habits will flow from there. Like, what often happens is that, we'll, if we think in terms of what we do, so I might say that, okay, I want to build a reading habit every day between 6 and 7, I'll read. Now, shit happens, and eventually you'll miss a session like that one day, you'll miss another session like that, and then you'll beat yourself up for it, and that'll affect your self image, and you'll say, no, yaar, I'm just not that kind of person, I don't have a discipline, blah, 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 and it never works out. But instead, if you internalize the fact that you are someone who reads books, that when you're bored, you don't reach for your smartphone, you reach for a book, then it becomes much more natural. The good habits flow from that self image rather than the breaking of habits, hurting your self image. So, to subvert the Nike slogan, just do it, I would say just be it. And it's exactly what you said, that when you're thinking of listening to 100 albums in a month, you're thinking of what you want to do. But if you just think of yourself as someone who loves music and listens to it all the time, then that takes care of itself. And the other way of the sort of useful exercise is, and this is something anybody of any age can carry out, is for a moment, when you have a little bit of time, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, sit and think about what your perfect self is. What is a perfect version of you like, right? And maybe write it down, maybe think about it, and then think about what does that person do with their time, and what are you doing with yours? Where is a gap? Where is a lag? What stops you from being that perfect version of yourself? And I think this can be useful. And if I try out this exercise with myself, it will just leave me with despair because there is so much of a gap. But to me, the key lies in habits. Like James Clear has written this great book called Atomic Habits, where he writes, quote, habits are the compound interest of self-improvement, stop quote. And just as people in finance underestimate the power of compound interest, I think all of us underestimate the power of habits. It's ultimately building these habits, building these processes that make you achieve things. It's like Clear himself says at another point in time that it's you shouldn't think of your goals, you should think of your systems. And that's the whole point. Like I tell my writing class that you put 100 writers in a room and they have great writers, good writers, mediocre writers. And I was about to take a name, but I won't take it. And you have that entire spectrum of writers and ask them what their goals are. Everybody will have great goals. As Donald Trump would say in all caps, I have the best goals. What makes them different is not the goals they have, but the systems they have, the things, the habits that they build. And those habits flow from what they think of themselves as. And so focus on that. Think about who is the best version of yourself. And also the other thing to note is that it's everything, that the life that your future self will lead depends on what your present self does. It's entirely in kind of your hands to sort of build that. And therefore I would say, like, one of the things that I'd certainly look at doing is avoid sort of what Cal Newport's written this great book called Deep Work. So, avoid shallowness in terms of attention and shallow work, and give yourself the space to do deep work, which could be anything in your field. It could be reading, it could be writing, it could be composing music, it could be anything that requires you to free yourself from distraction and just to sit down and work on something for a period of time. Build those routines into your life where you have that time to yourself and you're not always going from one WhatsApp message to another, one tweet to another.
Absolutely. Like John Lennon said, time that you enjoyed wasting was not time wasted. I absolutely love that quote. And I'm pretty sure that half the work of the second half of the Beatles at least wouldn't have happened if he was constantly on I need to churn out so much music on a daily basis. I think that's a fantastic answer, Amit. And that's almost an ideal way to end this. So I'm going to wreck that ideal ending by asking you the final question that I actually had for you, which is, I think you strike me as a person who's just adapted so beautifully. Like I think I described you once to a friend as the most new age, old age person I know, right? And not old age in the absolute age sense of things, but you come from that peak blogging era, 1 foot in journalism, 1 foot in doing very serious writing. And you have made a voice for yourself in podcasting, which I find exceptionally inspirational. because like we started this show by saying that, at a point of time when I came to Naren's house to record, I guess what was our fifth or sixth show, you had no idea what a podcast was, and you had your own preconceived notions of it. And fast forward 5 years later, you're taking a course on it. Right, that to me is exceptionally inspirational, purely because it shows that, hey, you don't need to have done X body of work in order to become I don't want to say expert, but it's not very difficult. It may look intimidating because there are so many players already around you and things like that, but it's actually, take any field, as long as you have the grit, as long as you have the determination, willingness to sweat it out a little bit, and of course a little bit of luck as well, anything could actually happen. So one, I just want you to comment on that, if you have any comments on that at all. And two, since you strike me as somebody who's extremely adaptable, I mean, I have no doubts that if in the hypothetical situation that TikTok was still legal in India, that you would be doing something or the other on that medium. What happens next? I don't imagine that you are going to be sitting still I don't see the podcast medium as such going away anytime soon, but I don't think you're going to be sitting still on your podcasting laurels. And I find that you will move on to another medium, or rather augment another medium. So both of those, just comment on the first, and do you agree with what the second postulation I made was?
First of all, though you tried to kind of recover the situation and all of that, you've wrecked my evening with that phrase old age. So, like, thank you very much, Chuck.
Yeah. Mature. Say mature.
Yeah. Mature also means old now. So what is no. But to be serious, see, the thing is, I think, okay, here's another fundamental thing. What is the deepest anxiety that creators have is also the deepest human anxiety, which is the anxiety of what other people think of you. And this often stops us from doing so much. If we are writing something, we'll get stuck at the first paragraph because we are already thinking of our readers and what they will think of us and all of that. And I think one of the lessons you learn as you grow into old age, to use your phrase, is that, that this anxiety is pointless because no one's thinking of you. Everyone's obsessed with themselves. Everyone is the center of their own universe. Nobody gives a shit about what you do. So if you write something silly now, it's not like screenshots of it are going to appear 20 years later on Twitter. Though actually on Twitter, it's entirely possible. But you get what I'm saying. So we have to get past that anxiety of what other people think of us and therefore do what we enjoy. Now, this comes to the question of, like, should I do a podcast when there are more than 1 million podcasts around? Should I get into YouTube now when there are millions of successful channels and all of that? I think there's a danger that these questions might approach the problem from the wrong angle, which is, can I be successful? What will other people think of me? And blah, blah, blah. And I think the right angle is that, can I do something new and interesting that I enjoy doing? And if you get into it from that angle, then it's not an issue. Like, I did not get paralyzed when I started my podcast by saying there are so many other podcasts. It was an interesting experiment. I was like, chalo, let's do it. It's not that I am doing phenomenally productive things with my time anyway. And then along the journey, I started enjoying the journey and thinking about it and kind of learning about it, and maybe lucked out in many different ways. And I mean, if I hadn't gone on Facebook on that precise day when you put up that post and I made that joke about the Narendra Shenoy selfie stick, the seen and the unseen might not have existed, would not have existed, right? So it is little things, and I kind of lucked into them. But my advice to anyone would be that, don't think of what others will think of you. Don't think of, oh, this field is saturated and it is like this and it is like that. Just do it. Secondly, and this is important, is that for whatever you do, be authentic to yourself. Like, people will, in my podcasting course, someone was thinking about, where are the gaps in the market? What can I do? What are the niches that are served? I was like, there are no gaps, everything it's all saturated. The one thing that will make your podcast special is you. Out of all the 7 billion people on the planet, only you are you. Only you can put that in a podcast. And therefore, and don't think that, oh, I am not an expert in anything. I'm not particularly smart. What can I do? It doesn't matter. The point is that you are on a similar journey to many, many other people. And when you start talking about that journey, whether it's an intellectual journey or whatever kind of journey it is, a journey of discovery or self-discovery or whatever, that'll resonate with many people who are at a similar space. This is podcasting. It's intimate. You don't have to be an expert from on high sitting and broadcasting gyan. You're sharing part of your journey. And as for what I will do next, I don't really know. I mean, I need to write the books I need to write. But I must say that recently I've become fascinated with streaming. because I have kind of seen that the same kind of intimacy I like about podcasting, that personal feeling, that feeling that you're just chilling and relaxing and just being yourself, and there is no compulsion to create something great immediately. I find some of that happening in streams that I have recently been watching. So I don't know if I'll ever get down to doing something along those lines, but it strikes me that that is I'm drawn to that medium for the same reason that I like podcasting now, because it has that stretched out sense of time and that whole leisurely, personal, intimate feel to it. And by streaming, I don't mean things like, oh, people are having panel discussion or interview and they're streaming it per se. Not the technology or the use of streaming to just put events out there, but what streamers are kind of doing with the medium when they'll have 6 hour conversations and all of that. And some of that is quite attractive to me.
Fantastic. Amit, thank you so much. There's so much to unpack over here, and I'm so looking forward to listening to this again. One, of course, to get all the references right, but just to listen to these words of wisdom, if I may. Also, I know that we joke about a fair bit, and we always have our in jokes and things like that. But I think you're one person who I deeply admire for what you do. I think you've taken certain risks, chances, opportunities, and you have this very sort of this leaving the baggage and just going on and creating stuff, like how your course is entirely based on your own experience rather than what is you'll find from the library podcasting 101. It's not that, and that, if I may, is something that has inspired the way I run like my course, for instance. So thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for this conversation, for being so generous with your time. I know this is something that you say a lot now. It's a chance for you to hear it from somebody as well, because you've given me not just closer to us, but you also walked me through how to use this wonderful tool as well. So yeah, Amit, thank you so much for being guest number one. And let's see when people when this gets to number 100, when people binge, they know that they're going to start off with this.
Yeah, thank you so much. The thing is, like I pointed out earlier, everybody's first episode is their worst. So, so who knows about that? But thank you. I think you're being much too kind. You're possibly trying to overcompensate for calling me an old man earlier. So, but I'll accept it all. I'm touched by it and honored to be, the first guest on your show, which is incredible. So, thank you so much.
We have one last thing to do, Amit. So I've written down two names I need you to choose from, which is from something that you said. I like the sound of both of these. First thing is not an expert. Just like the sound of that. Not an expert with whatever. And the second one is something meta. You said this so many times. I actually quite like the sound of that. I'm sure we can spin a story around it. So this pick is yours.
Something meta is quite interesting, and if you call your show that, I would have to, I mean, I will listen to every episode anyway, but I'd have a further temptation to do so because I'm always looking to get meta. And and that's in fact a good hook, because you spoke about how you want to invite Krish Ashok on the show, and Ashok has gotten meta with cooking, and that's an interesting approach to take, and it also fits a lot of things. Like,
Yeah,
you
it
can
does,
talk
right?
about anything at all, and you can say ki, haan yaar, we got a little meta. So I love the
I
name.
thank you so much. And it's like we can see the advertising pass coming. Like if you have the creative idea, then you retrofit and you put in the strategy behind it. So I think that's what we'll do here as well. Amit, thanks again. Thanks so much for this. And for everybody listening, thank you so much. And yeah, thank you so much for listening to episode number 1 of Getting Meta. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. For me, it was indeed a pleasure to re-listen to that. And there are many, many words of wisdom and practical advice in there. From each episode of Getting Meta, I want to take like 3 major takeaways just to act as a bit of a recap. And for me, from this particular interview, they were: number 1, while consuming content, don't confuse the form or medium for the actual meat or the content. Then 2, while creating content, just do something that you enjoy and just keep at it, and don't worry too much about what other people might think or not think, at least in the beginning. And 3, do not underestimate the compounding power of habits. Thought that was wonderfully stated by Amit. We discussed many things along the way and made lots of references as well. All of those are linked in the show notes of this episode, whether you're listening to it on a podcasting app or on YouTube. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. Tell us what you thought about the show. I am Chuck_Gopal, and he is Amit Varma, Varma, on Twitter. And I am Chuck of All Trades on Instagram. Amit has chosen not to be on the platform himself. I have a few really interesting, smart, and varied set of guests lined up over the next few episodes. So yeah, see you next week with episode 2 of Getting Meta.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week, Seat, Cred, and Global Victoria. We thank you so much for making all of this possible. So this week on Cyrus Says, Tapsi Pannu was recently featured in the Netflix original Haseen Dilruba was on. They discussed her experiences in Bollywood and a whole lot more. On Begin the Journey, Ashish Vidyarthi enlightens us with his wisdom on how one can get freedom from their own thoughts or insecurities when they communicate with others. On The Millennial Athlete, Tanvi and Shlok fill us in on all the drama from the world of sports with Wimbledon, Euros, and World Test cricket making headlines every day. On Postcards from Nowhere, Utsav Momoria kicks off a new series, Beneath the Veneer. We travel to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, where he takes us through his first experience of encountering the Red Sea. We have a brand new show, Misconduct. It's a true crime show hosted by Ragvi, a lawyer, and Nisha, a PR pro. They tell us about the story of Cyanide Malika, the lady who offered cyanide-laden sweets to women and after they died, loot their gold. On the Global Victoria Tech Talks podcast, we showcase some compelling new tech stories coming out of Melbourne. On one episode, Pawan Srinath speaks to Joe Agan from Nelnet International, where they discuss how the pandemic has affected the edtech sector and its evolution. Another episode has Varun Digirala talking to Ross Simons from Big Ant Studios about the gaming ecosystem and how they envision translating a sport to a game. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
From uncensored and unfiltered chats with the who's who of the entertainment industry, I, Siddharth Kannan, bring you a very hardcore chat show called Candid Kannan. Tune in every Friday on the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts.